morning, everybody, and thank you for coming. It's great to see so many people here this morning. This is a extension of some things that we've been doing in the city. We've been doing, some of you participated before with our Economic Development Committee, several members of whom are here this morning, and we were doing these business roundtables in smaller groups, and we said, you know, why don't we extend this to just broaden it to the general business community in Port Moody and have an opportunity for some networking and some interfacing with the city. So we have done a little networking this morning. Hopefully you've met somebody you didn't know. We've got a great guest speaker or two this morning, and then an opportunity for you to interact with the city on our big initiative right now, which of course is the update of our OCP. And we've had a lot of community engagement on our OCP, but we haven't had a lot of business engagement on it. So we're hoping that we can have some dialogue with you this morning, see if you have any concerns that way. So I'm Mike Clay, I'm the mayor of Port Moody, and we have several staff with us this morning again, but you didn't come here to listen to me. So I'm going to move right along. We have with us, just to open up this morning, we're going to take about 5 minutes. We are the City of the Arts, and we were always looking for, you know, how are we going to tie this in? What's our art hook going to be this morning? We have a very important initiative going on over at the Arts Center, and I'm not going to say any more. Dave, I'll let you do that. So Dave Bassett is here, and he's the chair of the fundraising initiative at the Port Moody Arts Center. So Dave.
Good morning. Well, you may think that the reason Mayor Clay's invited me to say something is because we're the City of the Arts. That part should be true. You may think it's because Mayor Clay likes the arts and participates, and he's done some amazing pottery in one of our pottery classes over there. So that would also be true. But his primary reason, as he said, I'm in charge of the fundraising for the Arts Center. So for those of you who haven't seen, we're adding to the Arts Center. We've moved a house over. You may have seen it across the street. Construction's going on right now. It's approximately $1 million. Our contribution as the Art Society is a little under $100,000, although the city's trying to get it up higher on our side. And the mayor wants me to talk to you about the fact we need more donors so we can pay them back. You see, they loaned us our share of the money, and we have to pay them back. So there is a brochure out there. We're on our website, and we would certainly welcome your donations, which are all tax deductible. And this will help us pay for our portion, so the community input. Because one of the things with the money, it's not just the money, but it reflects the community support. Be this or some other function in the community, it tells the city, oh, what we're supporting with your tax dollars is important because you've donated your money as well. So we appreciate your donations. Our fundraising is going very well. The city would like us to get more since a little bit of cost overruns seem to happen. But what I'd really like to talk to you about this morning is something I've discovered since I became a director of the Art Society, and that is probably the best untapped business opportunity in the Port Moody area. Now you might say, why would the Arts Center be a good business opportunity? Well, just to give you an example, on February 20th, we started the Arts Festival in this room. We had a wonderful gala function. I brought 4 of my clients. We had, I just forgot the catering, Christine's Catering did a phenomenal job with some food, some wine. The room was packed. The concert was so phenomenal in quiet Port Moody, we gave them a standing ovation. Do you think my clients had a great time that night? Did I give them a more memorable evening than if I just took them to a restaurant? Definitely. In July 19th, we're going to be having Art in the Park. We have 12 homes that have opened up their gardens to give tours and stuff. You could take you and a few of your clients around to the different tours. Now the one that happens to have the draw that we're doing later on is on May 31st. We're doing Uncorked BC up at Heritage Woods School. 30 different wines are going to be there to be tasted. 8 different restaurants are participating with food sampling. That sounds like a great client appreciation event. So I'd like you as business people to take a look at our website. The donation brochure is great. A little brochure here that tells you about the different things you can do to help your business by doing client events with us. And you're going to hear more through the Chamber and others because we believe that there's a big advantage in doing this. Oh, and one of our donors told me that last year he gave his wife some art lessons on Saturdays. So he feels really good because she gets to have an enjoyable art Saturday at the Art Center, learning the activities she's interested in, and he gets to take his clients golfing with a clear conscience. So thank you for your time, but please check out our website. We have some brochures outside, and at the end, we're going to do a door prize, which is 2 tickets to that Uncorked BC. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. The Uncorked event, I know that it's been evolving over time, and it's a showcase of BC wines. And the cool thing is that you get to try some of these wines without having to buy a $30 bottle. And I found out that there are actually some white wines that I like when I went to one a couple of years ago, and now they're in my collection at home. So a neat link between the Arts Centre and all these local BC companies, and I think they're all BC companies. And most of them are VQA wines, and they're top-notch products. So good opportunity again to support the Arts Centre, and as Dave says, maybe entertain some friends or some clients. So this morning we have the honor, and I will say the honor, of having Jock Finlayson with us. Jock is the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the Business Council of British Columbia, which represents over 250 large and mid-sized BC companies that together account for approximately 1/4 of all jobs in the province. So I think the rest of the jobs are all 1 and 2 people companies and small businesses, of which we have quite a few here this morning. And while Jock works with the big companies, he certainly understands the economic impacts on both large and small in the province. And we got a little lucky that he's here today, because he was going to be in Ottawa with the Premier, I understand, on a trip about economic development in the province. And I think most people probably heard the announcements yesterday about the 100,000 net new jobs being created in the LNG and other industries. So we'll let Jock shoot that theory down possibly in a minute. So again, I think we're super lucky to have you here this morning, Jock. I'll just quickly say, Jock holds a master's degree in business from Yale University, undergraduate and MA degrees from UBC, a postgraduate degree in economics from the University of London, author and co-author of 2 books and more than 40 published articles and book chapters, and again is basically world-renowned and certainly Canada-wide renowned for his expertise in the economic industry and forecasting, and that is what he's here to talk to us about this morning, so I will turn it over to Jock.
Well, Your Worship, elected officials, it's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate your timing as well. It's April Fool's Day, and you've asked to hear from an economist, so I commend you for your wisdom on that. I'm going to take you through quickly kind of a deck of slides. Economists like me, we're like special needs children. We need PowerPoint. We can't communicate without it. So I'll take you through our current kind of outlook for the economy. And BC, I'll spend the last half of my talk on BC, but the first half on what's going on in the external world, because at the end of the day, BC is a very small place. We're 1% of North America. Our economy is actually smaller than metropolitan Houston, Texas, and we're hugely affected by what's going on in global commodity markets, interest rates, the U.S. economy, housing starts. So I want to spend a few minutes on that. And just looking at the kind of current situation, every day I go to work, we're bombarded with kind of new data coming in on U.S. housing starts, Chinese industrial production, what's happening in the interest rate environment in Europe, as well as our own domestic indicators, and you can really get overwhelmed with the kind of day-to-day inflow of statistics that tries to illuminate what's going on both locally and in the global economy. I think it's important to kind of step back and look at what's been happening on a kind of 6- and 9-month trend basis. We don't pay a lot of attention to the kind of gyrations of data series in our organization, but we do try and get a sense of what the trends are. And in that regard, I would say there are some positive signs out there about where the global economy is going. We wouldn't necessarily have said this 2 years ago. But at the moment, we have a few things that are giving us some optimism about 2014-15. First, and I'll talk more about it in a minute, is the acceleration of the U.S. economy, which is hugely important for us in Canada, including here in BC. Second, in that regard, is the recession that the Eurozone was going through for the preceding 2 years ended in kind of the third quarter of 2013. And we don't pay much attention to Europe here in this part of North America, but it's important globally because it's over 20% of the entire world economy. And the Eurozone in particular was in a pretty serious recession for about a 2-year period. That ended, and that's been helpful in creating a more positive backdrop for the global marketplace. Japan, which we do trade with a lot, is growing, not very strongly, but the government there appears to be having some success in navigating Japan out of a 2-decade experience of kind of deflationary stagnation. So that's quite important in the global backdrop as well. And even the UK, which went through a terrible recession after 2008, it's actually growing at a fairly strong clip at the moment. So there are some positives out there externally that I think we need to pay attention to. As a typical two-handed economist, I will say there are some less positive things that we're monitoring as well. And one is certainly that the emerging economies, including China, but by no means only China, which have really been driving the global economic engine for most of the past decade, are definitely slowing down. It doesn't mean they're going to go into a recession, but they're not imparting the same strength to the global economy as we saw in preceding years. Commodity prices have come down appreciably over the past 2 or 2.5 years. They're still at fairly elevated levels in the case of many commodity markets, but they're off the highs, certainly in the minerals and metals sector in particular. Commodity prices have come down. And then finally, there's obviously a lot of geopolitical risks and uncertainties out there, whether it's North and South Korea, what's going on in the Ukraine, or the continued civil war in Syria. So these are things we can't really quantify, but they do create some uncertainty as we look ahead over the next couple of years. One thing I did want to note is just how remarkable this past several years have been for a lot of the advanced economies. And it's striking to me, anyway, that 5 or 6 years after the recession that we all remember in 2008 and 9, a lot of these advanced economies shown in red here are still smaller. In other words, their economies have actually contracted as a result of recession and a period of stagnation. And so countries like Italy, for example, its economy is 8% smaller today than it was at the end of 2007, which is not something you would normally expect to see in the global marketplace or with business cycles that we've gone through previously. Only the US, Germany, and Canada, among all these advanced economies, actually have larger levels of real gross domestic product today than we did back in either the fourth quarter of 2007 or the first quarter of 2008, depending on where each country had a slightly different peak, pre-recession peak for its business cycle. So lots of pain in a lot of the advanced economies, particularly in Europe. The other thing that's striking about the macroeconomic environment is this extended, astonishing period, really, of record low interest rates, the likes of which we have never really seen, certainly during my career. In response to the crisis in 08-09, central banks, all the major central banks responded by dropping their short-term central bank policy rates dramatically, close to zero in the case of the US Fed, as well as the Japanese central bank, and more recently the Eurozone. Canada's been a little bit higher. So central banks responded with tremendous aggressiveness to the 2008-9 recession, and we can remember that now. What's perhaps less predictable is that 5 or 6 years after the recession ended, we still have record low central bank policy rates. And I can assure you that was not something that people in the economic forecasting business anticipated back in 2008 or 2009. So it just underscores again, we're still living with what I would describe as sort of an abnormal financial environment. In the build-up to the 2008-9 crisis, we now know something a lot of economists didn't pay much attention to before, that was a lot of the advanced economies were developing a kind of chronic addiction to credit, to debt. And this chart actually shows the increase in percentage points of gross domestic product in total economy-wide debt in all the countries that are depicted here from 1980 up through to sort of 2011. So in the case of a lot of these countries, you had total debt and this isn't just government debt, it's household debt, financial system debt, corporate debt, and public sector debt all rolled together into one. In countries like Portugal, Spain, and Italy, you had total economy-wide indebtedness increasing by 150 to 200 percentage points of GDP over a 3-decade period, which is, again, not something we've ever seen before historically. And it's created a problem for a lot of modern capitalist economies. The level of economy-wide debt is now excessive, I would suggest, relative to the growth potential of a lot of these economies. And it's one of the reasons why there's continuing concern and a real fear, I think, of stagnation in the case of a lot of the European countries in particular, as well as Japan. Government debt is certainly a piece of it. This shows the change from 2008 to 2014 in government or public sector gross indebtedness measured as a percent of GDP. Remember, the 2008 period to 2014 is a relatively short window, and yet you had 20, 25, 30 percentage point increases in debt measured as a share of GDP. We've even had some of that in Canada, although we've done better than most. the timing on this is most unfortunate because the growth in public sector indebtedness in all these advanced economies has occurred at the same time as the front end of the baby boom generation has reached retirement age. And in an ideal world, one would prefer to see governments paying down debt to get ready for the fiscal pressures that are inevitable with an aging population, with a larger share of the population no longer working. Instead, our governments have actually been adding significantly to the debt burden in the 5 or 6 years right before the baby boom retirement wave began. So this, I think historians in the future will look back on this and suggest that the timing of this buildup of public sector debt was certainly not ideal from the perspective of the demographic changes that all the advanced economies are going through. Now, for the next couple of years, this shows a forecast from Scotiabank Economics. Since at the Business Council of BC, we're not arrogant enough to do a global economic forecast. We have an opportunity to get it wrong just at home here in BC, so we're not going to worry about the global market. So I use the Scotiabank, but most of the major financial institutions have an outlook that's similar to Scotiabank. So you can see here that the top row, the global economic activity is expected to accelerate, modestly this year and next year. It's certainly not going to be a booming global marketplace. I would remind you that before 2008, we went through quite a few years where the global economy was expanding by 5% a year. Those days are over. We're not likely to see that again in the foreseeable future. But we are looking for somewhat stronger global growth in 2014-15. The main reasons for this are an acceleration in the US and the end of the recession in the Eurozone and a little bit of growth in Japan. Roll those three together, it has a fairly significant impact on the global marketplace. For us in Canada, the best news for us in the next 2 years is going to be not what's happening here, but rather south of the border. The U.S. really is on its way, I think, to a better performance in top-line economic growth and job creation over the next couple of years. It's been a very disappointing recovery cycle for the U.S. The recession ended in June 2009. The first 4 years of economic recovery, the U.S. economy was limping along at about a 2% growth rate, which is half of what we would normally have expected based on previous business cycles since World War II. Finally, the U.S. in the second half of 2013 began to accelerate. It's important not to pay too much attention to what's going on in Washington, D.C. among the American political class. It's very depressing. If one spends your time looking at that, it's better to look at what's happening in the private sector economy. In fact, Joe Manchin, who's a Democratic senator from West Virginia, was on Fox News, and he actually said something I thought was remarkably insightful, which he said, the greatest threat to the American economy is the American Congress, which I thought was a bit of an indictment of American democracy. But I think it was actually true. And fortunately, Congress and the administration are not doing as much damage to the economy as we saw previously. So U.S. households are paying off debt, or at least improving their balance sheets, either through increased saving, paying off debt, or in some cases going bankrupt. But going bankrupt is one way to discharge one's debts, and a lot of Americans have done that. The corporate sector in America is in tremendous shape. U.S. large companies have almost $2 trillion of liquid assets on their balance sheets, which are available to be deployed in investment and job creation if the confidence is there. Housing starts, which were at the epicenter of the U.S. recession, are continuing to move ahead, and we'll see that for the next 4 to 5 years, which will be an important source of growth for America. And interest rates remain very, very low. And indeed, the U.S. Federal Reserve, under Ben Bernanke, who just stepped down as chair of the Federal Reserve after 7 years, has taken extraordinary measures through quantitative easing, through buying government bonds, through buying government mortgage-backed securities to try and put downward pressure on long-term interest rates. And indeed, people have looked at Mr. Bernanke's background, tracing him back to his very early days, have noted that the way he was raised, the values he developed as a young child, have served him very well during his 7-year tenure at the Federal Reserve. He's done everything everything humanly possible to support the American economy. In spite of that, the U.S. is still struggling on the job front. One of the great differences between the U.S. and Canada in the last 5 to 6 years has been our job market recovered much more robustly than the American job market coming out of the recession. We did see unemployment spike and employment decline in Canada in 2008-9, but we gained the jobs back much more quickly. The US lost 8.5 million jobs over 2008-9, payroll jobs, and they're still not back as of today. They're still not quite back to the level of employment they had prior to the 2008-9 recession, which is a very remarkable statement to make about the US economy. It just shows you the extent to which the US labor market has taken a blow as a result of what's been going on, not only the recession and the slow recovery, but technological change, outsourcing, competition from offshore goods, a whole variety of things have really impinged on the US labor market. Having said that, the US gained more than 2 million jobs last year. They'll probably gain 2.5, maybe 3 million this year. So the US job creation machine, I think, is kicking back into gear after a half decade, admittedly a fairly disappointing performance. I think for us in Canada, while we can watch developments in the US and have concern on some fronts, it's important to note the US does have some real underlying strengths, which I think will serve it very well over the balance of this decade. And we're going to benefit, if you will, from the spillover consequences of their enduring economic firepower. As a country, America is a relatively young country. Their population is average age of 37, 41 in Canada, older than 41 in most of the European countries. Net, a younger population is typically a more productive population. And I say that with apologies to those of you who may not consider yourself young, including your speaker. Huge domestic market, 320 million people, 23% of all global spending takes place in the United States. Very sophisticated consumers, very sophisticated firms, serves America well. 2/3 of the world's top 50 universities are based in the US. I would suggest that in an increasingly knowledge-intensive global economy, this is an enormous strategic advantage, is to have this superb complex of universities, particularly research universities, housed in the United States that really have no peers anywhere else in the world. And then finally, an improved business climate, a more competitive American economy due to the strong focus of US corporate decision makers on driving productivity gains, sort of unmatched anywhere else in the world. Relatively low labor, land, and construction costs by the standards of other advanced economies, including ours. Falling energy prices at a time when the cost of natural gas, when the cost of electricity has been rising at double-digit rates in Japan and in most of Europe. In many US states, the cost of energy has actually been decreasing in nominal terms. This is a remarkable kind of disparity between the United States and a lot of other advanced economies, and at the end of the day, it's a source of competitive strength for America, as is their growing production of both oil and gas domestically, on their way to self-sufficiency in natural gas, and by 2020 will be the world's largest producer of oil once again. Tremendous technology clusters in America, not just Silicon Valley, also San Diego, Austin, Texas, Boston in the biotech space, Philadelphia in the pharmaceutical industry. America's got tremendous assets in its advanced tech sector. And I would say there's no market economy that can match the US ability to finance innovation and entrepreneurial wealth creation. Even today, even with all of their problems, they're still the best in the world at doing that. So I think we will benefit tremendously in Canada from the extent to which the Americans will get back on track and draw on these enduring competitive advantages to grow their economy going forward. So let's switch over to Canada. I noticed in the federal budget that was brought down by Jim Flaherty in February, his last budget, all the charts that appear in the Government of Canada's budgetary information start in 2006 for some reason. It happens to be when Mr. Harper was first elected, but I don't think time began in 2006. I like to look back a little bit further. So in this chart, what we've done is just look at the major industrial economies over the period 2000 to 2012. And as Mr. Flaherty noted 11 times in his budget speech, Canada has in fact done better than most of the other industrial countries. We did lead the G7 in economic growth, not only since 2006, but actually going all the way back to 2000 and from 2000 to 2012. So we have done quite well. That I don't think tells us too much about what lies ahead, though. And indeed, one of the things that really is striking to me is how the US and Canadian economies are in different places at the moment. The Americans are growing because their exports are recovering, because business investment is picking up, job creation is picking up. None of those things have been happening in Canada. We have an economy here in Canada that has been heavily dependent on consumer spending and residential investment and a substantial buildup of household debt at the same time as the Americans are actually reducing their household indebtedness. So there's a real difference between the two. And I think in Canada, we're going to have to rotate the sources of growth in our economy over the next couple of years, because the consumer increasingly, I think, is tapped out. Consumer spending has been running above its long-term average as a share of GDP. Household debt in Canada has been rising, albeit the pace at which that's happening has slowed down recently, but the level of household debt is continuing to creep higher, measured as a share of income. Housing investment in Canada has been running a whole percentage point of GDP above the long-term average. We would not expect that to continue indefinitely, so there's a potential there for a pullback, and I think the reality of a pullback in residential investment. We have pretty frothy housing markets nationally in urban Canada. If you look at the 33 census metropolitan areas, house prices in nominal terms have doubled since 1999. It's a pretty long run. We would not expect that. I certainly would expect to see that continue going forward. So the bottom line for Canada is growth. If we're going to get growth in the Canadian economy, it's increasingly not going to come from consumers who are carrying high levels of debt. It's not going to come from the housing market, which has had more than a decade of very frothy activity. It's going to have to come from other sources. And the only really two candidates are trade, net export growth, and private sector investment. Just to show you something that I never thought I would see in my career, and that is that Canadian households are now more indebted than our American counterparts. That has not been the norm during most of my career, certainly never before, in fact, in modern times anyway, has household debt in Canada been significantly higher than it is in the United States, and it's just reached that in the third quarter of 2013, with credit market debt at over 150% in Canada and still rising, and 137% in the United States and decreasing. In terms of housing markets, there's lots of debate. I'm not a housing economist. I know people in Vancouver or Greater Vancouver are quite obsessed with housing prices. I'm not sure that's an entirely healthy thing. But The Economist magazine has a kind of tongue-in-cheek quarterly report they do on global housing markets. And in the latest report that was just a few weeks ago, they've actually got Canada and Hong Kong as the most overvalued housing markets in the world. And that's based on these two indicators that they track, which is the ratio of housing prices to rents and the ratio of housing prices to incomes. I wouldn't read too much into this except to note two things. One, our markets are pretty frothy by this measure, whether one believes in the predictive power of it or not. And secondly, we're in a very different place from the United States, whereas on these two measures, U.S. housing markets look sort of fairly valued. Canada looks pretty frothy. So again, another reason to be a bit cautious about the outlook, I think, for housing markets and housing prices in the Canadian context. Now, rock bottom interest rates are obviously have helped consumers take on more debt, finance larger mortgages, and it's fueled a lot of the activity that we've seen in the housing markets. And you know, the 3-month government T-bill rate in Canada is running at about 1%. The 10-year Government of Canada bond yield is running at about 2.5%. Those are both incredibly low interest rates. I was back with my family on Vancouver Island at Christmas, and one of my cousins who just retired, kind of an entrepreneur guy, he said, you know, I don't trust the stock market and I don't trust the bond market. And I said, well, how are you going to finance your retirement? He said, I'm going to use savings accounts and guaranteed income certificates at the bank. Thinking of this chart, I only could say to him, thank God Home Depot and Tim Hortons are willing to hire senior citizens to work in their stores, because you're not going to be generating very much income on your little pool of retirement savings at the kind of interest rates that we've been seeing. And they'll stay low, I think, in Canada for the next year to year and a half. The currency has been volatile. It's come down a whole 10 or 11% relative to the US dollar just in the last year. There's lots of debate about whether this is good or bad for the economy. I can tell you, in terms of macroeconomic models, exchange rate depreciation is a plus for overall levels of economic activity. That's not to say I'd like to see it go further down, but the dollar, arguably by any long-term kind of assessment, was overvalued when our dollar was trading at or above parity. So this will actually help our economy grow a bit, and it's going to be helpful to some of our industries here in British Columbia. One of the things that is striking about Canada and how it's evolved over the past 20 years or so is the growing importance of energy in our overall economy as a source of production and exports and value-added activity. Today, we're exports of all energy products, which is overwhelmingly oil, some gas, a little bit of electricity, accounts for 25% of Canada's total international merchandise export. So we've become a very energy dependent economy. I'm not sure that's actually a good thing, but it is what it is. Energy prices, access to markets for energy are critically important to the well-being of the Canadian economy. And in that regard, the trend in the U.S. that I referenced a moment ago to growing production of oil and gas in the U.S. domestic market is a real concern from a Canadian point of view, because hitherto, the only export market we've really served, both for oil and natural gas, has been south of the border. We don't really sell it anywhere else. So to the extent the Americans become more self-sufficient in both oil and crude petroleum products, we're going to have to either shrink our energy industry in Canada or find some new markets. And it really is a strategic imperative for us to do that. Asia is really where the action is. Most of the growth in global consumption, global demand for energy products generally is concentrated in the Asia Pacific, and indeed in a quantitative sense between 1990 projected through to 2030, demand for energy products, of which hydrocarbons are the most important component, is expected to quadruple in the Asia Pacific market, while barely growing at all in most of the other parts of the world. So if we want to be an energy supplier or producer, we're going to have to look for some new customers, and that's true on the oil side. It's also true on the natural gas side. If we don't get them, I would predict the energy sector in Canada will contract. Before turning to BC, this is just the same Scotiabank economics outlook for Canada for the next couple of years. A couple of weak years for growth in Canada, 2012, 2013, averaging less than 2%. That is expected to slightly pick up in the next 2 years, mainly due to the acceleration of growth in the United States. This is the key factor that will be driving stronger growth in Canada, and we will be lagging behind the U.S. in both employment growth and overall growth in economic activity for the next 2 or 3 years. So it's going to be a kind of reversal of the pattern over the preceding 5 or 6 years, where Canada was generally doing better than the U.S. I think we'll be lagging them over not only the next 2 years, but probably for the rest of the decade. I just wanted to leave you before turning to BC with this chart, which shows you what I call the change in the Canadian economic pecking order. These are 3 measures of economic well-being. There's lots of other ones we could pick. Real gross domestic product per person, average weekly earnings, which is what most people who work would care about, and then productivity, labor productivity, value of production per hour worked, which economists like me tend to obsess over. What's remarkable about the way the country's changed is today, the top 3 provinces, the 3 most affluent provinces in the country on these particular measures are not sort of BC, Ontario, Alberta anymore. It's actually Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland, for goodness sake. Newfoundland and Saskatchewan, previously have-not provinces that largely subsisted on federal government equalization transfers, are now paying more into the Federation than they're taking out in transfers. And there's been a remarkable transformation in both of those provinces, particularly Saskatchewan and Newfoundland, largely built on the development of raw materials and energy. So the country is different than it used to be. Ontario's a have-not province. Average wages in Saskatchewan are higher than they are in British Columbia. So it tells me that our country, our federation, from an economist's point of view, is really going through a very significant transformation in terms of where growth is occurring and how quickly different parts of the country are advancing. So over to BC. We've been doing kind of okay, but not great, and I expect that will certainly continue for at least another year. Last year was a poor one for British Columbia. Our households here have been stretched by high levels of indebtedness and high housing costs, coupled with very weak job markets in the past 18 months. Business investment fell, to the surprise of some people, in 2013. And governments, both federally and provincially, very focused on balancing budgets, which is fine, probably good in the long run. In the short run, it actually means you're taking money out of the economy, and that's actually been weighing on growth as well. We do expect that the Business Council and conditions in BC will improve over the next 2 years or so, mainly due to a pickup in global economic activity, accelerating growth in the United States, which will trigger a rise in BC's exports, and then some improvement in what has been a very soft BC job market. Business investment is going to play a big role in growth here over the medium term, largely due to the large major inventory of projects that I'll talk about in a moment. But we don't see much pickup in investment in 2014, and indeed the Stats Canada Investment Intention Survey paints a picture of relatively flat investment in British Columbia over the next 12 months. Liquefied natural gas, a lot of talk about that, a lot of political excitement about it. We've got a number of companies in my organization that are involved in it. If it comes to fruition, it will be a big deal economically for our province. The levels of investment are quite unprecedented, but it doesn't figure very materially in the outlook for the next year or two. It's really later in the decade when one would see the major capital spending occurring associated with liquefied natural gas. Just to show you a picture on the job market, we've really gone for 18 months here in BC, essentially with flat employment, which is concerning. 2/3 of household income comes out of employment. So when you have a job market that's not generating a lot of net growth in employment, it obviously has a negative effect on the spending power of a lot of households. So that surprised us, just how weak the job market has been. The consumer marketplace has been interesting to track in British Columbia over the kind of latter part of 2012 and the first half of 2013. Retail sales really slumped in British Columbia, basically down to more or less zero trend growth in year-over-year retail sales in nominal terms. Very surprising. More what you would expect to see, frankly, in a recession rather than even a slow-growing economy, and noticeably weaker over most of that period than the retail sales environment in both Alberta and Saskatchewan. And certainly, we've done a bit of analytical work trying to understand what's going on in the retail space. Certainly, the skyrocketing in cross-border shopping has played a role in the weakness in the retail marketplace in BC. The number of same-day visits across the border from BC, Washington State border crossings is up by, rose 250%, or no, from 200,000 to 500,000, basically doubled, more than doubled between 2009 and 2013. We don't know what these people are spending when they cross the border, but we doubt that they're going down to Whatcom County for the scenery. There's probably other things that they're down there doing. They're certainly filling their tanks, they're spending money at Costco, they're spending money at gas stations, they're eating meals. So we've done some work actually to try and document the outflow, the leakage of BC consumer spending into Washington State through this rapid run-up in cross-border shopping. And we thought last year we did a study that estimated that up to 4%, 4 cents of every retail spending dollar available to British Columbians was actually being spent in Washington State rather than in our province, and mainly in the Lower Mainland. That's where most of these cross-border shoppers are living. So that again has been one of the contributing factors, I think, to a fairly weak retail environment. But retail sales have been improving. The trend has shifted to a more positive direction, and we're waiting to track the data on cross-border shopping to see whether the stronger US dollar and the weaker loonie might be decreasing the numbers of cross-border shoppers. So far, we don't really see much evidence of it in the data. I mentioned business investment, and there is a very high level of project activity. These are major projects, counting essentially $20 million of capital costs or more that are underway or approved or permitted. There's over $80 billion of that activity sort of on the books now in BC, and potentially a much larger figure, well over $100 billion of potential major projects. A lot of that tied, however, to liquefied natural gas and to oil pipelines, all of which I think has a bit of a question mark over how much of it will really go ahead. But this is an important source of employment and economic activity in BC, and it will be a key contributor to growth, whatever growth we do get in the BC economy. The residential side, residential investment, which in BC is quite an important piece of our economy. It accounts for a larger share of GDP here than it does in the other parts of Canada. We don't see a lot of growth in that area. We see it maybe being stable at best, but you can see it's been a contributor both to recessions and to recoveries in British Columbia over the past 20 years. On the export side, this is a good news story for BC. We had a 7% gain in our export shipments, the value of our exports last year, which was better than Canada. And this year we're expecting another 7 or 8% increase in export sales out of our merchandise producing industry. So that's going to be, along with business investment, a key source of growth in the provincial economy. We are still a resource-based economy. It's important to recognize this. A lot of people would rather we had other industries, but we are a resource producer. 75 to 80% of British Columbia's international merchandise exports, even today, are still coming out of the various resource-related industries: lumber, pulp and paper, coal, minerals, metals, energy, and agri-food. One advantage we do have in BC compared to other provinces long-term is our trade is much more diversified. We're not dependent just on the U.S. market, which in the case of Ontario, for example, 85% of Ontario's exports are going into the United States. BC is under 50%. We have much greater exposure to Asia-Pacific economies. Those economies will be growing faster than the advanced economies like the U.S. over the next 20 years. So our province is actually strategically kind of well-positioned to benefit from that trend, because we already have the trade linkages and the trade relationships developed with a lot of those Asia-Pacific markets. A brief comment on public finances. Here I would just note the variation across Canada in provincial government debt burdens. This chart shows net provincial debt measured relative to gross domestic product. BC's at about 18%. Alberta actually has no debt because it has financial assets that exceed the borrowing the government has done. Saskatchewan, which in 1992, when I was working in Ottawa, the Federal Department of Finance had a contingency plan to take over Saskatchewan's debt and bring it onto the books of the Government of Canada. Why? Because there was concern Saskatchewan would no longer have credit ratings that would allow it to sell its bonds, and they didn't want that to sort of contaminate the Canadian brand. And look at where Saskatchewan is now with the second lowest government debt burden. Quebec in the middle, I don't want to pick on our friends in Quebec here. They are having an election in a few days, but they've got a government debt burden that's 50% of GDP. And yet in the election campaign underway right now, no one is talking about this. I would argue this is all they should be talking about, because it's going to drive everything in that province over the next 20 years. But Quebec is in tough shape, and Ontario, frankly, is not that much better. Western Canada, far better positioned in terms of the level of government indebtedness at the provincial level. So I'll give you our BC forecast after leaving you with the insight of Mr. Galbraith. It's not that we don't like doing forecasts, we just know the risk of being wrong is never trivial. But we have issued a new one just a few weeks ago for BC. I would draw your attention to the top row. Last year was a poor year for our economy. We estimate growth was only 1.4% after inflation, and that was quite a bit lower than the average for Canada, which was about 2%. We do expect to pick up this year and next year, along with some gains in employment, a gradual decline in the unemployment rate, more or less stable housing starts, and a modest pickup in retail sales. Why do we expect this to happen? It's largely external. It's largely driven by the same trends I discussed a moment ago: U.S. acceleration of American growth, slightly stronger global economy, Europe coming out of recession, continued low interest rates. These are the sort of building blocks of the scenario for modest improvement in BC's economic performance over the next 2 years. Going by industry, we see a positive story for the wood products business, built really on the lower dollar, but very importantly, the recovery in the U.S. housing market, which is the biggest export destination for BC wood products. We see the energy sector, although LNG is not going to come to fruition in the next year or two, there's a lot of money being spent on the preparation to lay the groundwork, if you will, for the potential investment decisions that could be forthcoming in 2015 or 2016. Companies are already spending very large sums of money on engineering. There's a dozen energy companies that have taken office space in downtown Vancouver, LNG companies. So there's already some money being injected into the BC economy as a result of LNG, even though we don't have an LNG industry at the moment. Transportation, logistics, the port, the gateway economy will benefit from stronger global growth and a continued recovery in trade volumes. Non-residential construction, I've already mentioned. Engineering, scientific, technical, and environmental services. This is a very important component of the lower mainland economies. A lot of jobs, well over 100,000 jobs in this complex of industries. They pay very well. They're increasingly export-oriented, and we see this part of the economy growing quite robustly over the next couple of years. So too with the advanced technology industry. Doesn't get enough attention in BC. It's 6% of our economy. We've got 80,000 jobs. They pay well, mainly here in the Lower Mainland. We're very optimistic, actually, about the outlook for the tech sector in BC. And tourism, finally, after a long period of struggle, we see tourism actually starting to grow again due to the better U.S. economy, more U.S. visitor numbers, lower Canadian dollar, and improved air access into Asia. These things will all create an environment, I think, where the tourism sector is going to grow. We're not as optimistic in the short term about the outlook for mining, which is struggling with much lower prices for a lot of the minerals and metals that we produce. Film and TV production, we've got a great industry here in the Lower Mainland, but it's very much challenged by the aggressive tax credits and incentives being offered by other jurisdictions. So we'll probably be lucky to hold on to the activity that we have today. We certainly don't see a lot of potential for growth. Food processing has been contracting in BC. We've lost facilities and lost jobs. We don't see that changing. What I call heavy industrial manufacturing has been challenged in BC as well. And residential construction will be stable, but we don't see an uptick, as I mentioned, in housing starts, overall investment levels. What about the Lower Mainland? The Lower Mainland will do better, I think, than BC over the next couple of years, driven really by stronger job growth and population growth, which clearly creates kind of a demographic and income backdrop for slightly stronger growth in retail sales and GDP. As the global economy incrementally moves to being one that's more Asia-centered, we're going to benefit from that in this region due to our role as Canada's leading gateway to the Asia-Pacific and the host region for Canada's largest port. So that's going to help us, I think, including in the next couple of years in this region. There's a fair amount of infrastructure investment underway here in the Lower Mainland. Obviously, the Evergreen Line is top of mind for folks in this room, but there's a number of new office towers being constructed in downtown Vancouver. Both the airport and the port have major capital programs that they're proceeding with. There's other public sector infrastructure projects. The new Emily Carr University campus is one. So capital spending in this region on infrastructure and major projects will be an important source of growth here in the Lower Mainland. I already mentioned the tech industry, which we do see growing. And we will benefit here, although we don't have a lot of mining or LNG, obviously, in the Lower Mainland. We do have a lot of the corporate activity that supports both of those industries, and we're going to see that, I think, play out over the next 2 to 3 years. Some of the issues and challenges we hear about in my membership with regard to the economy doing business here in the Lower Mainland, obviously the high cost of land and housing is a factor. We just did a survey of our members, and this emerged actually as an important barrier to growth and investment in the Lower Mainland. We don't really have a regional approach in Greater Vancouver to economic development, to basically marketing our region offshore, or to try and attract businesses and high-value business activity into the Lower Mainland. We tend to do that at the level of individual municipalities, where people work very hard on it. Most of the people we're competing with around the world have regional approaches, not individual municipal approaches to trying to do that job, so we think there's maybe some lessons there. We have relatively low incomes. Actually, I'll show you one final chart on that in the Lower Mainland, which is a constraint. Obviously, challenges around the transportation system, both congestion, but also higher costs for people to get around, higher costs for moving goods and services. We do have some pressures linked to the presence of the gateway and the port here in Metro Vancouver. In an ideal world, you might want to have Canada's largest port located somewhere other than right in the middle of a very densely populated urban community of 2.3 million people. That's not what we have, so we have to find a way to live together and recognize that the port's a big engine for the Lower Mainland economy, but they also have to be a responsible corporate citizen. Just ending here with a prescription, if I might, and then I'll close. Where should we be putting our effort around trying to grow business in the Lower Mainland? I would say that the focus should be on what economists call traded industries. These are industries that are capable of generating export earnings by selling the goods and services outside of the local marketplace. You can't build a prosperous economy on the basis of condominium development and coffee shops and nothing else. I say that as somebody who works in Vancouver, because that line works better in Vancouver. We need other industries that are going to be able to sell goods and services in external markets and bring those income flows back that can help to augment our incomes and our standard of living. So I think the focus should be on the advanced technology sector, which is big and diverse and has a lot of growth potential. Tourism is a traded industry sector, a very important one for our region. What I call high-end producer services, legal, accounting, architecture, engineering, environmental services. These are all industries that actually export as well as servicing the local marketplace. When a lawyer or accountant working here in Port Moody or in downtown Vancouver services a client from outside BC, which a lot of them do, that actually creates an export stream or an export earning stream into the province. Manufacturing, something we don't pay a lot of attention to. There's 80,000 jobs right here in the Lower Mainland in manufacturing, and a large portion of what we produce in the manufacturing sector is in fact exported. Education has become a multi-billion-dollar export industry for BC, which I think has further upside potential. Transportation logistics, because it's tied into the gateway and the port. And of course, resource industries. Again, we have very little resource activity in the Lower Mainland, but we do have a lot of the corporations and the service suppliers that are part of the resource complex, and indeed, 1/4 of the 100 largest firms based in BC in the Lower Mainland here are actually in resource industries. So the corporate infrastructure to support and drive resource industry activity elsewhere in BC is an important component of the economic engine here. And I will just leave you with this chart, which will surprise, I think, a lot of you. Many people probably think of Metro Vancouver as a relatively wealthy part of the world and part of Canada. And if you look at household wealth indicators, we are quite wealthy. But if you look at incomes, we're not a particularly stellar performer in the Canadian context. This chart just shows median census family income for the 33 census metropolitan areas of Canada as of 2011. And we were surprised to see Metro Vancouver down near the bottom at 28th and way below Calgary, Ottawa, Hamilton, even Halifax has a higher median family income than we do in BC. So this tells me two things. One, there's a lot of households that are financially stressed in the Lower Mainland, and we all know that, but this kind of makes it real. And secondly, we should be focusing on how we can develop and build our economy in a way that will actually lift incomes up for the median or average household or family, because that's an area, frankly, where we haven't been doing very well. So with that, Your Worship, I will stop and look forward to the next presentation. Thank you.
I'm hoping to see if I can see the glazed over eyes here. That was like Economics 101, 201, and 301 in a half an hour. And you lost me at the beginning when you said something about you heard something interesting on Fox News. And then it got worse when we found out that we were doing worse than Saskatchewan and Newfoundland in the economy. So tough market for you guys and your businesses. So I wanted to acknowledge that Councillor Dilworth, I think she might have left because she had to get to work, but she was sitting back there with us this morning. And Michael Hine, the Executive Director of the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce, is here, and the Chamber is our partner on this event and many other events, and we encourage you to become a member of the Chamber if you're not already, and maybe Aaron Robinson can talk you into that as well if you're not already convinced about the value of the Chamber. So moving right along, we are funneling this conversation down, which is what we are attempting to do. We've gotten a very thorough, high-level overview from Jock, and Eric Vance is with us this morning. Eric was previously employed with the city. Eric has an MA in FCMC, an MCIP, and an RPP. I don't know if any of those are treatable, but they're impressive nonetheless on his business card. So over 30 years of experience as a professional planner, economist, management consultant, and educator. And Eric's going to talk to us now about bringing these issues down sort of to the more local level. And after Eric, we're going to come down to the very local level with Tim Savoy, our Director of Planning, and talking about the OCP. So Eric, I'll turn that over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Before we get going on this topic, I got a great story I'm going to tell you, and I'm getting looks of horror from Kevin and some others. I promise it's short and there's no swearing in it. Anyways, this happened yesterday. My wife and I just got back from 2 weeks in Mexico. One of our daughters had a destination wedding down there last week, so 2 down, 2 to go. And so we flew into Vancouver International Airport on Sunday night. It was really late. By the time we got home, it was Monday morning, about 2 o'clock. Absolutely exhausted. We opened one of our suitcases. We put it on the floor. We pull some stuff out we need. We fall into bed. Get up yesterday morning. The suitcase is there. Too tired to do anything about it. I go to work. My wife goes to work. And suitcase is laying open there all day. And she comes home about 4:30 or so, and so she decides to start cleaning out the suitcase, so she pulls everything out, she's rummaging around in there, and she thinks the suitcase is empty, and then she looks down, and there's something alive in there. And she said she screamed so loud she thought some of the neighbors thought there was a murder taking place in her apartment. So she slams the suitcase lid shut and zips it up, and I get home about 7:30 last night. She says, there's something alive in the suitcase. And I said, well, it's probably a cockroach, because when we were down in Mexico, there were cockroaches running around. So I unzip the suitcase, and yeah, there's something alive in there, but it's not a cockroach. It's a scorpion, and it's about this big. No, it was about this big. It's big, right? And so I screamed, and we zipped the suitcase back up, and we literally spent about a half an hour trying to come up with a plan on what we're gonna do, right? So we moved the suitcase over into the bathtub, and we unzip it with a pair of tongs, because I'm convinced that if I put my hand on the zipper, something's gonna come out and grab me and do something horrible. So we turned the suitcase upside down, we're shaking it to get the scorpion to follow it into the bathtub, except the scorpion decides he doesn't want to go in the bathtub, he wants to stay in the suitcase. And not only does he decide he wants to stay in the suitcase, he goes and finds somewhere in the suitcase where we can't see him. So we spent about a half an hour smashing on the suitcase, rattling it, doing all these things, and finally the scorpion falls out into the bathtub, not very happy. I got a long pair of tongs, I put him into a glass jar. And so I get up this morning, well, last night I was thinking, is there more of him, or is this the only one? Get up this morning, and there he is sitting in the glass jar, and I don't have the heart to kill him. I mean, this guy worked so hard to get to Canada. I mean, so one of my many important things I have to do today after this is figure out what I'm going to do with the scorpion. So if any of you are in need of a scorpion, I have one available. Anyways, so I'm probably in terrible trouble with Canada Border Services for bringing a live scorpion into the country, but so be it. What do I push here? Right, there we are. Yeah. Okay, so on to the topic at hand. Oh, not that far. To understand where Port Moody is in terms of its economic opportunities and where it's going, you have to understand Port Moody's history. And I just love these old photographs of Port Moody. Some of them I'm sure you've seen before. Emerson Mill, which became Flavel Cedar, which is now Mill and Timber. In the bottom there, some other early shots of our predominantly forest-based economy here. The arrival of the first CPR train in Port Moody, July 4th, 1886. That was supposed to be what put Port Moody on the map and was going to cause our economy to boom. But as most of you know, CPR took a look around and said, no, we don't think so, and kept going down into Vancouver. So our moment of glory as the terminus of the CPR faded fairly quickly. And what would remain for many decades was a dirty, nasty industrial town. Like nothing here except dirty industry. And that is actually what saved us and gave us the tremendous opportunities we have today. Because for many years, all the development, all the investment that was sort of moving out from Vancouver through Burnaby, rolling out into the valley, rolling up into the Tri-Cities area, it leapfrogged over Port Moody, went into Coquitlam, went elsewhere, and we were largely left alone here. And that, I would argue, is a good thing. Because this is what we got as a result. This picture was taken about 6 years ago. I still love it. It's still the nicest picture I can find of Port Moody. There, of course, is Newport in the foreground. Just over on my right-hand side there, you can see Sutterbrook, and just in the background there, you can see the two Klahani Towers, and there you can see the construction crane on Tower 2 of Klahani. I actually live in Tower 1, and my wife and I, after 25 years on Heritage Mountain, are renting in one of the Klahani Towers there, so it's quite different now living down in the town center. So you see what we look like now, or at least in the last few years. And we only were able to do this because we were overlooked. And if you think back 20 years, those of you who were here 20 years ago, we ended up with these large brownfield sites in Port Moody where industry had gradually moved out and they were just sitting there. The IPSCO pipe plant, which is now, of course, the Klahani development, that was there 20 years ago. Where Sutterbrook was, that had been an old mill site many, many years ago, and it was sitting there. And we were able to develop that. Newport, someone remember 25 years ago, that was just 3 or 4 old farmsteads there. And so we had these large parcels of land that had been overlooked, neglected, forgotten about in favor of better development opportunities elsewhere that became available that we could do some really creative things with. And if those had been developed 20 or 30 years ago, it would have been just townhouses, it would have been warehouses or something like that. But by being overlooked for all those years, it created some great opportunities for us. So what has happened over the last 20 years beyond that? Our population has doubled. When I joined the City of Port Moody as Director of Planning in '92, our population was about 18,000. We're now double that. We're 36,000 people in Port Moody. Of course, if this was Surrey, that would be a neighborhood, but we were at one time, in percentage terms, one of the fastest growing municipalities year after year, not only in the Lower Mainland, but in British Columbia. And a lot of that was a result of the single-family, predominantly single-family townhouse development as well, up on Heritage Mountain, Heritage Woods, Twin Creeks area. That's what drove a lot of our growth. Average household sizes, 3.5, 4 people per household, plus some of the initial development, Newport and so on down here in Inlet Center. That party's over up on the mountainside now. It's done. We have no more opportunities, or very few, for single-family home development. Perhaps someday over in the Ioko surplus land area, but that's a story for another day. But our rate of population growth will not be as quick in the future as it has been in the past. We're going to have a lot of condo development, but as most of you can appreciate, the average number of persons per household in the apartments is 1.5, 1.8 people. So we're going to get a lot of new households happening, but we're not going to get the population growth at the same rate to go with it. I mentioned the industrial decline. Not only we just flat out lost some of our industries, but as some of you will remember, both Petro-Canada, or Suncor now, I guess, and Imperial Oil, they were refineries for many years, employing many, many hundreds of people. They're no longer refineries. They're shipping finished product by pipeline. They're simply tank farms now. As a result of that, there was a lot of jobs lost of those 2 operations, plus we lost a lot of tax base out of that. So there were years when we were actually going backwards in terms of job growth. We were actually losing more jobs than we were gaining in Port Moody. The good news is the Evergreen Line, as Jock mentioned a couple of times, is finally underway here. And as a result of that, the development focus is shifting back over to Moody Centre. As some of you know, over the years there's been some development along St. John Street, but it has really languished along there. And I would argue that's actually a good thing, because the kind of development we were getting along there, okay, but nothing outstanding. We weren't attracting the top tier developers to the Moody Centre area. They simply weren't interested in it. They're more interested in Coquitlam Centre, other opportunities. We're now starting to see, and I won't name names because some of them are thinking what they're doing is secret, but it's not. But we're attracting some of the top tier developers now, all well-known names, into Moody Centre. They're starting to assemble land there. They perceive the opportunities with the Evergreen Line coming, particularly around the stations. So while the action for the last 25 years was on the North Shore and in Inlet Center here, and there's a little more to happen in Inlet Center, it's largely going to be over in Moody Centre. And Tim in a few minutes is going to be talking about what the vision is for Moody Centre, and contrary to rumors to the otherwise, it's not going to be wall-to-wall high-rises all the way along St. John Street. Kevin looks a little disappointed by that, but anyways, I think it's quite an exciting plan, but I think there's some amazing opportunities in Moody Centre. Now, taking it down to more specific opportunities, I mean, the reality is that we don't have a Dominion Triangle like Port Coquitlam does. We don't have the Pacific Reach area like Coquitlam has. So you know, our days as an industrial powerhouse, to the degree we were, are largely over. Most of the economic development opportunities are going to be predominantly local population serving. It's going to be retail, and we're doing very well with that, obviously with Sutterbrook, Newport, and some of the other redevelopments on St. John Street. Personal and business services. I know a lot of you folks here today, you're in these kind of businesses, and food and beverage. So I just put up some images of what we got here now and what we're going to see more of in the future. Day tourism, again, it was mentioned earlier, you know, arts and culture. There's been a lot happening in arts and culture in Port Moody. We're not the only ones, of course, that are pursuing that opportunity, but we're doing a lot. I think there's an opportunity to do even more with arts and culture. Obviously, our waterfront. If any of you have been down on a sunny Sunday afternoon in the summer to Rocky Point, it's crowded down there, and it's only going to get more crowded as time goes on. I mean, we really are a waterfront community. We're the only community in the Lower Mainland that has both a North Shore and a South Shore. Belcarra, Bunsen, I continue to see tremendous opportunities there. I mean, obviously, well, this is interesting. Belcarra, I don't know if most of you know this, most of Belcarra Regional Park is in Port Moody. It is not in Belcarra. The playground area is in Belcarra. We have the rest of it. Not that it matters that much, but there's a lot of traffic moving over to Bunsen and Belcarra, more to come. I see an amazing opportunity if we're ever able to do some redevelopment over at least part of the Ioko town site to get some businesses over there that can really tap into that flow of day visitors over to the Belcarra Bunsen area. Eagle Mountain, I have a question for you. You see a photograph there with a lake in it. Who recognizes that lake? Anybody know what that lake is? That's Cypress Lake. Does anybody know where Cypress Lake is? It's on Eagle Mountain. How many of you here have ever been to the top of Eagle Mountain? Okay, one hand at the back. I can't begin to describe to you what an amazing opportunity there is up on Eagle Mountain. It's not part of Port Moody, it's not part of Coquitlam, it's not part of Anmore, it's Crown land. There is an amazing network of trails up there. Some are old logging roads. There's an amazing network of mountain biking trails up there. And the only way up there is through one of the local communities. And I believe that as time goes on, there's amazing opportunities to do more with outdoor tourism. We'll bring more people through Port Moody and up Eagle Mountain. It really is an amazing resource up there that so few people ever visit. Coquitlam spillover. Some of you may be aware that Coquitlam has an economic development office. They have a manager of economic development and they have an assistant economic development officer. They have just hired a manager of tourism, and that person's job is to develop and implement plans to attract predominantly more day tourism to Coquitlam. Well, okay, that's good, but that's going to have, in my opinion, spillover benefits for Port Moody. Simply by bringing more people out to the area generally will benefit from that as well. So we're not paying for the manager of tourism over in Coquitlam, but I believe we'll benefit from what he does. Home-based business, obviously continuing to grow in number terms as our population grows. But interestingly, over time, only about 8% of jobs are suited to be home-based, and I'm one of them. And so we'll get more home-based businesses as time goes on, but as a percentage of the total jobs in Port Moody, not likely to increase. And the reason I put those two images up there is I think there's sort of this misconception that home-based businesses are predominantly in single-family homes. And my home-based business was for 18 years up in Heritage Mountain in what was our former dining room. But now that we're renting in Klahani, I got a home-based business there. And what's really struck me is the number of people that are living in the apartment developments around us here who do have home-based businesses. So even as as our future development is predominantly apartment, we're still going to get a lot of home-based businesses. And now, one of the biggest stories, in my opinion, that has not really been focused on to date very much is over at Sutterbrook Village. Some of you will recall the site sitting there with cladding around it that was supposed to be a hotel. and of course, it's not going to be a hotel now. Ani determined that it was not viable to put a hotel in there, and the site where the hotel was going to go was sat there for a number of years, and Ani has now decided to proceed with an office tower there, 9 stories, and this is a couple of renderings of it. It's going to be just over 160,000 square feet in total, of which about 140,000 will be office, and the remainder will be retail. And you say, okay, what's the big deal? What the big deal is I was at a presentation a couple of months ago on office trends in Metro Vancouver, and there was a presentation by Avison Young there, Andrew Petrozzi, who's their VP of Research, and he's showing where all the office development is taking place, where it has been, where it's going to be. Obviously, the focus is still predominantly the downtown area. You know what was missing off all this charts, graphs, as maps? The entire northeast sector. There is so little office development out here that it isn't even tracked by Avison Young. It's not tracked by Colliers. So I talked to Andrew afterwards and I said, do you know this is taking place out here? And he said, no, I don't. And he says, I got to get some data on this. This is a really big deal. There, you know, Coquitlam, for example, is trying really hard to figure out strategies to attract office development to its city center. It's been very good with the retail stuff, with the personal services, population serving, doctors, dentists, lawyers, all that sort of thing. Trying to get purpose-built office space into the Coquitlam Center area has been a challenge. It's a challenge for everybody. And yet here we are. We're getting this office building within a half a block of the Inlet Center Evergreen station. So this is a really big deal. This is a lot of office space. By contrast, across the street, the Newport office tower, that's 70,000 square feet. The existing office building over at Sutterbrook, that's 45,000 square feet. So it'll probably take on years to fill this up, but this is going to bring a lot of jobs to Port Moody, and it's a really big deal. We now have in Port Moody in the last few years more Class A office space that's been built than over in Coquitlam. So I think it's a really big deal, and it's really exciting for us. But we are competing. I mentioned Coquitlam is obviously interested in some of the same opportunities we are, particularly on the arts and culture side. They have festivals, they have all sorts of things, that's fine. But we got to continue to think about how we compete, what our niche is, how we're marketing ourselves here. Port Coquitlam, again, they're always thinking about this, Burnaby, everybody in the Lower Mainland. And just to remind everybody, even though we have lost some of our industrial base here, industry is still vitally important to Port Moody in terms of the jobs it supports, the taxes it pays, and also the goods and services that it procures locally here. So I've just put up some slides here. You can see PCT up there. There's Mill and Timber. Who knows how long it'll be here. When I joined the city over 20 years ago, one of the first people to come and visit me was Bob Wingrove, who at that time was the manager of the mill. And he introduced himself and he said, Eric, you're going to hear rumors that we're shutting down any time now. He says, we're not. When we're gonna, we'll come and tell the city. And that was over 20 years ago that Mill and Timber was going to go. There's more rumors that it's going to happen soon. Who knows? It could happen tomorrow. It could be there for another 10 years. But it's an important part of our economic base. Reichhold Chemicals, Imperial Oil, some of other industries. So while we've evolved as a community, we still very much are a community where industry is important. It's just different kinds of industry. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim, but I think the mayor would like to probably introduce him.
I was going to introduce Tim and I was going to give you his little letters, but Tim told us the other day that he's leaving the city of Port Moody to take a job as the director or manager of planning at TransLink. So we now know that Tim isn't very bright. So I don't know why anybody would leave the city of Port Moody to go to TransLink, where I'm sure your future is already known by most of us to be destined to be horrible. But Tim has been, this is Tim's second stint with the city. He was with the city for, I think it was about 6 years, 7 years? 4 years? Oh, sorry, it seemed longer. And left and went back to back east, and then came back here as the manager. Was then director. Now it's the general manager of planning, and also was responsible for bylaws and our long-term planning. And what he's been working most on, which we started in 2006, believe it or not, 8 years ago, is an update to our OCP. So another reason maybe that Tim's leaving, I'm not sure. 8 years working on a plan might get to be a little much for somebody. But so Tim is going to bring this back down now to the very local level on what we are doing with our OCP. And when Tim's finished, we'll take questions for any of the three or for anybody else. We have a number of managers here from the city. And again, that's what we're also here for, is just to connect everybody. So Tim, go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. So the thing that Eric didn't tell you about his suitcase, I'll add to the story, is that someone stole it on the way home from the airport. So he managed to get it returned yesterday. So I had an interesting comment this morning, if she's here, and she's probably not here. She said, "Where does that Eric Vance live?" Anyways, he showed up with his suitcase here for a meeting yesterday, so they delivered it here to the City Hall. So, good morning, and next, what I'm going to, let's make sure it's everything. Next, what I'll do the next few minutes is try to paint a new picture for Moody Centre. Looks at a new urban form, essentially based on, what do we think? We've heard it twice this morning already, the arrival of the Evergreen Line. So we have been working on the plan since 2006, most recently since 2012. But so I'm going to start with a bunch of provisos at the start of this. This is still in draft form, could change as we work through the process, so stay tuned. This is the draft as it exists today. So as the Mayor mentioned, we actually started in 2012 with this most recent plan, and involved extensive public consultation. So just to give you an idea, so I love talking about it because I've worked on lots of plans in other cities, and this is really unprecedented. So we've had public surveys, we had 10 public input neighborhood meetings, we had a design charrette, we had it reviewed by all civic committees, and council had 4 town hall meetings. So, and then coupled with that, we've had hundreds and hundreds of letters from our residents. Some people love it, some people hate it. So it seems to me there's no in between this time. So the draft plan was really prepared in the context of the Evergreen Line arrival. And when we drafted the plan, and Eric helped us with that, we came up with 9 guiding principles, one of which is supporting economic development in our community. So the draft plan includes a revised land use vision for those areas really in proximity to the Evergreen Line. We're getting 2 stations funded by the Evergreen Line, one here in the Inlet Centre neighborhood, one in the Moody Centre neighborhood. And related to that, of course, policies that will help guide development in these neighborhoods. So the way we did it, essentially we broke the city, Moody Centre, down into 7 sub-areas. And what I'll do in the next couple of minutes is just quickly run through these. I should ask, who participated as part of the process so far? Do we have, I recognize a couple faces. So it's a very different group this morning, so happy you're here. And the process is not done yet, so if you're really interested, it's going to Land Use Committee tonight in this room. So future development in this area really strive to focus on balancing what's there, the residential character, what's there, and providing some commercial opportunities. People in this neighborhood wanted the opportunity to buy things in their neighborhood without going elsewhere, Coquitlam and Inlet Centre. So to achieve this, a number of land use designations were created, really to create this mixed-use opportunity in this neighborhood. The second sub-area is, we call it Spring Street Promenade. So Spring Street is a very unique roadway for those of you that either work on it or have your buildings on it. It's got a distinct character. Every time I bring an urban design professional to town, they're always in love with Spring Street because they can see where this could go in the future. So the goal of this sub-area is really to acknowledge the interesting character but maintaining the functionality of the street. So this is a view of the current Spring Street. And to give you a little idea of what it could be, this is really intended to show a number of uses that are oriented towards the street, lots of activity, shared roadway with vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists. So it's anticipated that the revised land use vision will spark new and different types of business activity as a result of people living and working in this neighborhood. So when we finally get down to the details, lots of elements that will distinguish this from other streets in the city, mainly being sort of narrow street entrances, varied paving materials, landscaping, lighting, street furniture, and other features that contribute to making this an attractive pedestrian realm. Don't smile, Eric. Eric's looking at us, just dying for Spring Street. The next area, commercial heritage areas centered around Queens and Clark. So the objective of this area really is to allow for the existing heritage buildings to remain and ensure that they're really integrated with new development around them as they redevelop. the non-heritage buildings, I should say. So Queen Street Plaza is a key element in this area, and it's envisioned that the residential component is extremely important to ensure this is a vibrant, functional neighborhood. So this drawing gives us a bird's eye view of Clark Street looking west. Queen Street Plaza is on your left-hand side of the screen. So the intention really is to allow the existing heritage buildings to remain with compatible new infill development around the plaza. Murray Street Boulevard, a new mixed employment land use designation has been applied to the south side of Murray Street. So the idea with this is to create, allow for a combination of uses, light industrial, commercial, office, and residential uses on the street. I should have mentioned the numbers that you see on these maps refer to the number of stories that could potentially be possible. And the other proviso is that with rezoning applications, the plan will provide no development rights to the property owners as it exists. It really sets the vision for where a rezoning application should go. So in this case, building forms could be allowed up to 6 stories, provided that the main level, the main story, has some employment related non-residential uses. So this is the current view of Murray Street looking west again around the 3000 block. And this is the same view that shows this mix of commercial and light industrial uses on the ground level, as well as residential above. So Eric touched on it, the Oceanfront District Mill Site, Flavel Cedar site. This has been talked about for a number of years. I've at least 3 or 4 plans we've worked on. We've included some form of vision for the mill site. But we've heard, it's funny, when I started working here in 1997, when we talked to the mill, I said, we're not leaving. So even though we were doing this waterfront visioning study, the mill was adamant, we're going nowhere. And that seems to have softened over the years. For now, they're actually active partners in the process and participating in the process. With that said, we heard a few weeks ago that they're going to be adding another shift to the mill, so they're doing well, and based on what we heard from Jock earlier today. So this designation really applied to the site to create a mix of commercial, marina, light industrial, live work, institutional, and public open space uses. It's really intended to be something similar to what's around us, mixed-use neighborhood, higher densities, providing jobs and places for people to live. The thing I should mention, though, and is important to you, is one of the key objectives is to create a linkage between this site and the existing heritage core. So the idea would be that you'd be providing people that would service and use the services in Moody Centre, open up the waterfront access from Rocky Point Park. So this drawing shows a vision for what this oceanfront district could look like. Really, and I mentioned extending the pathway from Rocky Point Park right around the entire site. And it shows commercial uses oriented to the water and high-density residential behind. The thing that some people might be concerned about is, well, how much commercial space? We don't know that at this point. The site is designated as a special study area. So these are the things that would have to be worked out. So the goal would be to provide enough residential, enough commercial, industrial, or other uses that will complement and support businesses in Moody Centre. So a very important area, the Moody Centre transit-oriented development area, is the area located right around the Moody Centre SkyTrain station. So the idea in this case, this would be the highest concentration of a mix of pedestrian-friendly development and would provide for a mix of residential, retail, office, service, civic, institutional, recreational, and cultural uses. So it really is the heart of Moody Centre, all within walking distance of transit. So the neighborhood, the vision really includes creating flexible outdoor spaces that can accommodate a variety of uses, public art in these spaces, breaks in the blocks, pedestrian connections in the blocks to allow for easy access to the transit station, a range of housing options, as well as encouraging a significant amount of employment-related uses in the upper stories of these buildings. There's one study I just had a look at that shows that the overall vacancy rate for office buildings within 500 meters of a transit station, rapid transit station, continues to fall in the region. So it seems to be the location where more offices is heading, as we see in Inlet Center here. Now, for years, this was the most exciting area. Eric touched on it: Newport, Cedar Brook, and Polygon. This neighborhood here. What this plan envisions really is sort of the the remaining parcels to redevelop in a way consistent with what's already in place. So these are all 5 minutes walking distance to the station, which is located at Ioko and Barnett. Really a continuation of what we see happened already in this neighborhood. This is a graphic showing what could happen on the Honda site if you're looking actually west on the Barnett Highway. So more people obviously and more commercial opportunity. Now to wrap up my portion of the presentation, the updated draft also contains a number of new and revised policies that will support economic activity in the city. New land use designations such as the mixed employment and Moody Center TOD designations. Over 30 policies focused on supporting and enhancing commercial and industrial activities. It really acknowledges the importance of businesses contributing towards a vibrant, sustainable community for Port Moody. So the OCP described a changing Moody Center that could lead to new opportunities for you as business owners, a pedestrian-scaled neighborhood with amenities to facilitate walking and at-grade shops and services to create active urban edges. Additionally, of course, more people will be living in this neighborhood to support your businesses. So this is the one thing about population projections. It's very, very general, but we've done some rough estimates for the Moody Center station area. So it looks like an additional 3,500 people could be living in this neighborhood if the plan is implemented in the fashion outlined in the plan. So these comments, I think the only thing I want to say is, because I don't see anyone screaming and running out of the room like I sometimes see, but this will take a long time to implement. And it's reliant on a number of factors. Obviously, the economy is a big part of it, the real estate market, and most importantly, council's approvals at the end of the day. So council will be approving projects as they come forward. So this will not all happen at once. And the last thing, it is draft. So going to the Land Use Committee tonight, if you're interested, please feel free to come by at 7 o'clock, and that concludes my presentation.
I think, and I hope that Tim was kind of bringing it home there, and I think that a couple of years ago, I asked Tim, I said, how many tax properties do we have in Moody Center? And it was like 900. So even if you said there was 3.5 people per tax property, which would be high, you're still, under 3,000 people in that area. And I think the Westport people have brought that really to the front, that there aren't enough people down there right now to support a lot of the businesses. And I know a lot of those are your businesses, and you're probably looking forward to more density and more development down there, although I think everybody wants it to be done, reasonably responsibly and environmentally responsibly and such. So that is where we're heading with the OCP right now. And again, we do, Jock is unusual opportunity. He's not usually in Port Moody, and the other two guys are. But if you have any questions, we will open it up to you for questions, and then we'll do a prize draw pretty quick, because we are getting close to 9:30 here, which is when we wanted to wrap up. So questions? Go ahead. Mark.
I have a question. What's going to happen on St. John's, that corner that's been empty for like a long time, but hotel was there and it's gone? And
You're going to have to be more specific. There's a lot of empty corners on St. John's.
No, but this is the one, like the bus stop is right there.
At the very end, at the west
At
end.
the very end of the Snake Hill.
Yeah. It's a private piece of property. The owner was originally had some very dramatic plans when the SkyTrain was a LRT system, and that tunnel portal was going to be right there, and he had a plan to develop around it. When the LRT became SkyTrain and it moved 2 blocks or a block and a half to the north, his plans, I'd have to try to be nice about it, changed. The city council had originally designated that site for a high-rise development of 26 stories and since lowered it down to 6, cautioning anybody that any designation in OCP is subject to change when people come with their plans and their variances. The current landowner has the property for sale, and there are a number of developers that have expressed an interest in the property. It appears as if nobody's going to touch that property until the OCP is done, so that they have some idea, because it was up and then it was down, and then it was up and then it was down. I think a lot of people are very nervous about that property. And I know for a fact that one of the developers is trying to assemble some of the land in behind it as well, because they feel that if they could take the residential properties that are behind it out of the sort of complaint zone, that it would allow them to do a little higher density on that site and then designate those other properties as dedicated green space that would go back. So it's totally, like any property, it's a private piece of property right now, and the owner could do anything, like sit on it. But then they haven't been successful in selling it, although we have had a number of people who've come to the city and said, if I bought it, would this be allowed? And we've said, you know, you'd have to take that plan forward and see if it was allowed.
Thank you.
Questions? Nobody? Okay, Dave, you want to do Dave's got the prize draw for the BC Uncorked event, which if you put your business card in, he's got it up here.
Any last minute business cards? For 2 people, 30 types of wine, 8 kinds of food. Okay. And I don't have my glasses on.
Oh,
Pacific Coast Terminals.
Wade Leslie. Wade, I think, left and went back to work with Diana as well. Wade, you're gone? He's gone. You have to be here?
I'm flexible. You want to have to be here? Okay. So surprising to see that.
This
Trevor Schmidt.
Trevor was in the Tri-Cities, what's it called, the leading, what did they call it, Trevor, the Leaders of Excellence or something? What was in the?
Circles of excellence.
Circles of Excellence, congratulations.
The tickets aren't printed, but I will get them back to you. Give me my card before you go. So
Okay, perfect.
Chase
Thank
me. Okay, thank you.
And we're gonna do one on behalf of us, the city, the Tracks and Time Book, and we have a copy of the Tracks and Time Book here for both Eric and for Jock for coming out and helping us out today. This is a spectacular history of the city of Port Moody. If you haven't seen it, it's called The First 100 Years, which, although it sounds like it maybe matches up with our 100th anniversary, of course, it didn't really, because it started earlier than that. So this book actually predates the incorporation of the city, which was 1913. So this actually goes back into the late 1800s. Wonderful book, lots of pictures, good story of the history of Port Moody. And again, we do have a copy for you, Eric, and a copy for you, Jock. And we also have one that we will draw for. He probably already has one. Oh, and he might have left. David, where did you go? David Peterson? Left.
He's gone.
Let's go again. He was sitting right up here, right?
Yeah, he was gone.
Apparently these people have to get to work. Samantha Stewart from Can-Am Containers. There you go. So any more questions? I know that we are late, and I know that people have to get back to work. Go ahead.
I'm asking this for someone.
Okay.
Anyway, we have been hearing about the development for the IGA site. Is there any plan for that?
There's currently in the OCP, it was designated as a 4-story maximum development. And my last conversation with the owner of the IGA site was that he has no interest in pursuing any development. He's come to the city a number of times with a plan for development, and that he's giving up on those plans. And I would suspect that he's probably going to put the property up for sale. That's speculation on my part, but when he said that he's no longer going to pursue the development, I would think that he's probably going to put it up for sale.
And the Ioko ghost town site?
The ghost town site?
I
The-
was wondering about the development.
Yeah, so the Imperial Oil site is currently a large portion of it, mainly in Anmore, is for sale. There's 87 acres in Port Moody and 150 acres in Anmore that are up for sale. This is the portion of the property that Ioko Imperial Oil Company would determine is outside of any environmental remediation area that would have had any damage from the refining operations. The property was listed as an expression of interest. They had about 4 or 5 companies express some interest, and they haven't been successful yet in selling the land. Most of the Port Moody lands are encumbered either by a riparian area, streamside, or park, or the heritage zone, which is the town site. All those properties are protected under a heritage conservation area. We don't know what may or may not happen in Anmore, because those lands are obviously in Anmore. But what we do know is that we have policies on our OCP that there will be no further development on Ioko Road unless the David Avenue connector is completed to keep those cars from driving through on Ioko Road. By our estimates, that would involve probably a $20+ million bridge crossing of the Mossam Creek, if it can be done at all, with the environmental issues there. And I think that when most of the people have looked at the opportunity to buy that land, because Imperial is only selling that little corner of the land and it's so heavily encumbered, there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest. They have another, 600 acres? of land on their 450 acres of land on the refinery site, but they're not interested in selling any of that right now. So I don't anticipate anything in Port Moody is gonna happen on that land for a while, although what happens in Anmore is kind of the burning question for us, because they potentially could develop, and then that traffic would come down on Dioka Road, which is what we're trying to avoid.
One more question. Well, we were actually talking about BC economy being so driven by Asian connection. Was this big? Because I was actually talking to someone and they were saying that, well, why aren't we having a particular location in BC that have real good, Japanese type of department stores, and that would attract everybody coming into that particular area. And that's something that, if you're familiar with a Japanese type or of department store, that it's just something that's unique, different, and it's very art-oriented type of, because of the Japanese way of putting things together. So it's actually coincide with what our city is, very, very much art-oriented and different lifestyle, and be unique and different. And then that's something, did we ever actually pursue to try to talk to some Japanese developers or what?
It's an interesting idea. I mean, we haven't had anybody approach the city with an idea like that. Normally what we do as the city is we put our OCP vision document together, and then people bring us their ideas and how that would fit. One of the problems we have here is we have small lots and a tendency to very small businesses here. So when people want to do something on a larger scale, they tend to look to Richmond or Surrey or somewhere where they can do, more fulsome development. But it's not an idea that we've heard before, but certainly be willing to look into it. Anything else? If not,
Sorry, one more.
Go ahead.
I don't know if it's part of the OCP discussions. Has there been any initiatives as far as transportation, beyond the Evergreen line, to address the congestion through Port Moody, the rush hour congestion?
Yeah, so we're starting right now to working with a joint Tri-Cities transportation sort of task group right now that we're putting together. Primarily, we're feeling a little bit isolated from what they're doing on Burke Mountain in both Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam, and all those people funneling down onto the roads through Port Moody. So, as you probably know, previous councils, we had like a no new growth stance in Port Moody, which altruistically might seem like a great idea, but if they're just going to build to the east and put all their cars on our road anyhow, then all we're doing is giving up the economic benefits of growth while we still have the penalty of all the traffic. So we've had meetings with TransLink, asking them as the regional transportation authority what they think should be done. They pulled the funding off of the Murray Clark connector because they said that the project wasn't regionally significant enough to warrant the investment. So our question back to them is, well, then what is your plan? Where are these cars supposed to go? Because we are over capacity on our local roads. They don't have an answer for that, so now we're going the other route with Coquitlam and Poco, where we're saying, okay, we need to come up with a sub-regional transportation plan that works for us. And that's where we're at right now. We just started that a couple months ago, really. That came as a result of a joint council meeting that we had with them, and we're just starting to move that forward now.
So it's being studied, but no initiatives.
There's nothing concrete going on right now, no.
When the OCP is going to be finalized by Metro?
So we have a land use committee meeting tonight, at which point it could come back to council for April the 8th, which could put it to April the 22nd for first and second reading, I think we talked about. And this is all going well, and then it would be referred to the outside partners, then there would be a public hearing locally, and we think that if it all went according to plan, earliest would be June, like early June. Because we have to send it out to Coquitlam, Poco, New West, Burnaby, Metro Vancouver, all the other places. But if everything was to just move through, unfettered right now, it would be out of the public hearing by 22nd of April would be the public hearing, and then it would go out for the other consultation, come back in May for adoption, probably in early June.
Finished by Metro?
That would be in that time period in between, they have a chance to comment on it.
And the station that was supposed to happen by Andres Vine, it's not gonna happen?
There was never a station that was supposed to happen by Andres Wine. There's a wish that there would be a station at Andres Wine. Again, that story when it started was the Evergreen Line people came back to us and said, if you give us $25 million and 15,000 people down there, we'll build a station. And 15,000, you know, that's another 50% of Port Moody's population again. The track and the alignment is designed to allow for a station down there, and I think it's one of the things that we're trying to be careful about, the way we, Eric said before, not doing some things now sometimes benefits you in the future. So what I'm concerned about is if we do the wrong thing in Westport now and people start building, then they will basically be dooming the future to, you know, not have an opportunity for a station because they'll put the wrong kind of development there. And I think that's what we have to be careful of, is making sure that we're looking to the future, even with what we're doing in the next few years. That it may be 15 years before we get a station there, but let's make sure that we leave that window open and that there's an opportunity for that to happen. Because if we start building in around where the station was going to be with really low density, low rise, you know, single family homes, there would never be enough population down there to warrant it. Anything else? I want to thank you for coming then. If there isn't, we plan to keep doing these things. We have an idea, and I don't know, maybe just a quick opinion from you that are here, is there's some big changes coming with our recycling programs with MMBC and with Metro Vancouver with product bans and cardboard. They're not hitting the commercial sector yet, but that is next. So we're thinking for the next one that we do is to maybe do a sort of a greening your business forum here, where we bring in some people that have ideas for how you can incorporate more recycling, maybe extending our organics program or our recycling program. Does anybody have any interest in seeing that? Just put your hand up if you have any interest. Okay, so a little bit. So that might be, and again, we're probably trying to stay on about a 3-month to 4-month schedule. So we're probably looking at, you know, July to do another one, June to July to do another one of these. And we hope that if we do, that you'll be there. And we are trying to accumulate email addresses and such so that we have a good way of getting in touch with you. So again, you know, long night here in the building. We're here again at 7 o'clock for a land use committee meeting if you're interested in that about the OCP. And otherwise, thank you very much for coming and enjoy the rest of your day.